Good morning, everyone. How we doing? We've got our coffees in. It's Sunday morning, and it's time to worship the Lord. That's right, TJ. I like it. I hear we have a birthday tomorrow. Danielle in the back is ready to celebrate tomorrow. Shout out to you. Hey, we are transitioning out of our series on practicing the way, spiritual practices that help us follow Jesus, and we are entering the realm of beasts and dragons, the realm of lambs on a throne, of trumpets and angels, the realm of the heavenly city of God coming down to earth to remain there with us forever. That's the realm that we're entering into. And the title for this series, Faith in the Dragonlands, it comes from the Latin phrase hic sunt dracones. Hic sunt dracones means here be dragons. It comes from an ancient inscription on one of the oldest globes that's still around, one of the first ones, I guess, that was designed. And they would write this inscription in areas of the map that were yet undiscovered and uncharted. At least, in the European mind. Obviously, someone was living there, but this was signified to designate an area that was yet uncharted and undiscovered. And I feel that's so fitting for this series because John the Revelator, he is writing to us, and he is writing to Christians in the first century who are about to enter into uncharted waters and unknown territories. Their world as they know it is about to be upended. They're going to experience world-ending events. And John is writing to that church as well as the church at large. My title for today is Apocalypse Now. Come on, we are in the apocalyptic theme. And today I'm going to hope to, this is an introductory sermon to the series, so I'm going to hope to give you the three main approaches to the book of Revelation that the church has historically taken. So I'm just going to introduce those to you and kind of prime your senses, and then we'll get back to that as we go through this series. Our text for today is Revelation chapter 1, verse 8. Lydia read it already. Let me read it to us again. I am the Alpha and the Omega, says the Lord God, who is and who was and who is to come, the Almighty. I don't know if there's any other book, maybe the Psalms, that has inspired more worship songs than the book of Revelation, right? We're going to talk about the apocalypse. What comes to mind when we talk about an apocalypse? I guess it's safe to say that in literature, novels, fictional books, even in movies, the apocalyptic genre is alive and well. You can get, like books like The Road, movies like The Book of Eli. The genre is alive and well. The end of the world genre is there. And I think in part that is because we live in an atomic age. We live in the age where human beings have developed the unique capacity to destroy ourselves with, well, I hope it's a little more complicated than that, but basically with the push of a button. You hope there's a little more to it, TJ, right? We live in the age where the end of the world as we know it, utter destruction and ultimate destruction, is not so hard to imagine, is it? Maybe you've seen certain movies that were apocalyptic with a sort of like a Christian theme, like the Left Behind books. They produced a lot of movies and films. Has anyone seen the one with Nicolas Cage? It was really bad. Yep. We got Kirk Cameron, Hollywood's evangelist. There we go. 3 parts, I think, 2 or 3 parts of them. And that brings me to an important first point, and that's the point of the rapture. In the 1970s, a book came out written by Hal Lindsey called The Late Great Planet Earth. Maybe you've heard of it. And in that book, and this is a mouthful, he proposes pre-tribulational, premillennial dispensationalism. If you leave theologians alone long enough, you get weird terms like this. pre-tribulational, premillennial dispensationalism. Basically, what Hal Lindsey argued is that Christ is going to return, and in a large part he did this based on the book of Revelation, is that Christ is going to return in two phases. First, he's going to return for his church, and he's going to rapture his church, and then the great tribulation will happen across the globe of utter destruction, of an antichrist coming to rule and reign. And then Christ is going to come back after a short period of tribulation to slay his enemies and to establish his millennial kingdom. Maybe you've heard of this view. I once spoke to a friend. As you know, I didn't grow up in church, but I have a friend who did, and he was raised with this rapture theology and idea, and he told me this story that when he was a kid once, he went shopping with his mom, as you do, go buy apples, and he lost his mom. His mom probably went around the corner, and he couldn't see his mom, and his first thought was, my mom is raptured, and I'm left behind. I'm not just left behind in the store. This is the tribulation. This is the rapture. Crazy that that's the first thing a kid thinks about when he loses his mom. Maybe you've been part or you've been exposed to some really crazy end-time speculation. YouTube rabbit trails are there. I have to pull Lydia out once a week. I'm like, Lyd, let's not do that. We enjoy it, but we also want to be careful. I've been in settings where, just like Revelation-themed evenings with presentations, with crazy stuff, like literally I would see, the guy would show us news articles and connect them with the text of Revelation, but also show us, I remember he showed us this helicopter from Russia that in Russian was called a scorpion, and so he connected that to the wrath in Revelation. And I was like, wow, this is a crazy connection if that's really true. So we're going to talk about this. We're going to talk about this in this series. We're going to talk about different approaches to this book that the church has traditionally held. The book that John wrote is titled The Apocalypse of Jesus Christ. In Greek it says Apocalypsis Iesu Christou. We have this idea that apocalypse means destruction and horror, fire and brimstone, right? That's the association. The word actually means revelation. It means to reveal something. It means to uncover something. And what is that something that John is trying to uncover for us? It is Jesus Christ. This is the revealing, the uncovering of how Jesus Christ is working in the midst, churches, of the tribulation and trials that you're about to enter into. Which is ironic, because if there's ever been a book that's been more enigmatic and mysterious than it's the book of Revelation. People have stumbled over this and have tried to understand this book still to this day and struggle with it. My take is that John's Apocalypse is a prophetic attempt to reimagine the world that is through the lens of Jesus Christ. An apocalypse is John's prophetic attempt to reimagine the world that is through the lens of Jesus Christ. There's a bit of interesting stuff about authorship and dating. I'm not going to go into those details today. I just don't have time for it. One thing that is important, and we'll repeat this as we go, is the dating of the book. When was it written? There's two main theories. One is during or right before the reign of Nero in the 60s. Just think 1960s, Nero, It's in the 60s. That's when Nero reigned. And the second date is in the 90s when Domitian reigned and was Roman emperor. Why those two dates? Because those are very significant historically. I'll get into that a little later. But also these two emperors, Nero and Domitian, were very, very hostile to Christians in the first century. Made life very, very hard for them. Now, before we go into the three views, I just want to let you know, as we go into this book, I want to introduce this idea to you that hopefully will really help you read it, navigate it, interpret it, discuss it with your friends, kind of process it in prayer. And that's this, that this book that John wrote basically has three interwoven genres. we're basically reading three different genres that work and play together. What are they? One, John's book of Revelation, the apocalypse of Jesus Christ, is a historical epistle. It is a letter to 7 historical churches in Asia Minor, modern-day Turkey. Okay, it's kind of like southern Turkey along the coast. John's book of Revelation is a historical letter to the 7 churches. That means, guys, I was always taught that first part is the letter, right? Chapters 2 and 3 that we're going to cover next week. No, the whole thing is a letter to the 7 churches. In fact, John mentions in chapter 1 and at the end in chapter 22, this needs to be read to the churches out loud because the time is near. This book is, first of all, a letter to 7 historical churches that really existed, that we can trace back, that were going to face very difficult circumstances. So we have a letter. Secondly, we have a prophecy. John's book of Revelation is a highly, deeply prophetic book. John says that he sees a vision about 41 times in this book. You know, the Bible is all about hearing the word of God. John sees a vision in the prophetic tradition, just like Zechariah. You know, what do you see, Zechariah? I see a man. John sees a vision. He describes that he sees a vision about 40 plus times. It's also prophetic in the sense that it is deeply reliant on the Old Testament prophets. Of the approximately 400 plus verses in the book of Revelation, about 275 have clear allusions and connections to Old Testament prophecies. Isaiah, Ezekiel, Jeremiah, Daniel, Zechariah. In other words, if you want to understand Revelation, you have to know the prophetic history of the Bible. Make sense? So we have a letter, we have a prophecy, and then lastly, and this one's a little bit hard to understand, this is apocalyptic literature. The apocalyptic literature was a genre in the first century and also before that and a little bit after that we don't have anymore today, but wasn't unique to the Bible. There were more writings like this. This means that the apocalyptic genre always has this idea of angels and demons, light and darkness, salvation and judgment. It casts a story in these terms. You know, when I go to the movies and I'm going to watch a Western, I expect to see a cowboy with maybe a horse and he's slinging a gun, right? There may be a saloon brawl, I don't know, something like that. Mark, the brawl sounds good? When I go and see a science fiction movie, one of my favorite genres, I don't expect to see a cowboy and a horse, unless it's a crossover. I expect to see what? A spaceship. I expect to see a quasar star. I expect to see, aliens or other types of creatures. I expect to see highly developed technology. There may be themes of sacrifice and friendship and faithfulness, but these themes are told through a certain genre, and that's also what's happening here. Another thing about the apocalyptic genre is that it may mean, I'm not saying that it does, it may mean that the book is not necessarily chronological, but that it moves in widening cycles. John is saying similar things, but he's expanding the message and he's recasting it in different terms, just to put that idea in your mind. Why does this all matter? I think it matters because the way we read the book of Revelation influences to a large extent how we relate to God and how we live out our faith in the world. It just does. In Revelation's case, it has very real consequences. Is John in Revelation calling us to, for instance, repair our world, or is he encouraging us to abandon it? Am I going to repair the world, or am I going to abandon it? Is Revelation a detailed prediction of futuristic end-of-the-world events, complete with an antichrist, end-time war zones, mark of the beast? Or is it solely a book written to a certain historical context, a certain historical churches? Or, another alternative, is it conveying some timeless spiritual truths that can be applied to any church at any time? Or maybe all of the above, right? That's what we're going to look into in this series. My title for today is Apocalypse Now, and we're going to discuss these three approaches to the book of Revelation. And then I probably don't have time to give us some guiding principles, but I will be able to maybe record a short video for that as we go forward. We wanted to do short videos after the sermon anyway, kind of post-sermon, little context that we couldn't share. So maybe we'll do that. All right, everybody still with me? Everybody still good? Yeah? So we're going to look at these three historical approaches. And one way to remember these three approaches, Jesus makes this statement. He says, I'm the one who was, I'm the one who is, and I'm the one who is to come. And it just so happens that these three approaches that the church has taken to this book kind of correlate to that. One focuses on the historical aspect. Number two focuses on the timeless aspect, the one who is. And number three focuses on the future aspect, the one who is to come. The first approach is called the preterist approach to the book. Okay, this is important. Preterist is from Latin, means former. The core idea that people that propose this view of Revelation is that, kind of like this, the further we get away from the first century AD and from the events in the first century, the further away we get from the events that the book of Revelation describes. People that are preterist argue that this book mainly deals with a prophetic telling and communicating of the destruction of Jerusalem in AD 70, and some people also argue that the fall of the Roman Empire in the 5th century. Okay, so preterists, if you're a preterist, you look at this book mainly historically. John wrote this book, they say, to comfort and to warn the church of the impending destruction of the Jerusalem temple that had been the center of the faith for centuries, and to prepare Christians against intense persecution, burning, arresting, fake trials, looting of property, confiscating, that was about to happen under Nero's reign in the 60s. Nero and Domitian were both Roman emperors, especially Domitian, who tended to demand worship and allegiance that conflicted with the worship and allegiance to Christ. So John wrote this book to encourage the church to be faithful witnesses in what was about to come upon the whole world, the whole Roman world. This view is what we would call post-millennial and optimistic. What does it mean, post-millennial? We'll go through these terms a couple times. Today I'm introducing a lot of new terms. I know that. Please bear with me. The millennium refers to the 1,000-year reign of Christ that's described in the book. To be post-millennial means, what preterists mean by that is that the millennial reign of Christ in the book is to be understood symbolically. That reign of Christ started when the church was born on the day of Pentecost. Remember how Acts says that Jesus rises up, he ascends into heaven, and he is seated at the right hand of God the Father, waiting for all his enemies to be made his footstool. He is ruling and reigning now, and progressively, as the gospel is preached throughout the kingdoms of this world will become the kingdom of our God. Does that make sense? That's what preachers argue. This is a very popular view amongst biblical scholars, people who are have been wounded by church, are reconstructing their faith, really like this view. It's a safe place, it's in the past, and it makes a lot of sense. Some of the pros of this view, I think some of the strengths are One, in the book of Revelation, we have a lot of time references. We have, for instance, we have the historical churches in Asia Minor, right? The 7 churches at the beginning of the letter that were they were persecuted. They were persecuted by Jewish communities that they lived close to, and they were persecuted by the empire. There seemed to be, and I'm getting a little bit ahead, but there seemed to be some clear references to Emperor Nero in the book. Whether that's directly referring to him or more the empire, there seem to be some clear references later on that point us to Nero. And then in Revelation 11, the temple in Jerusalem is still standing. So maybe when John was writing this book, the temple in Jerusalem was still standing and still actively being used. Another strong point of the preterist is that, whatever your take is on the development of history, we were just talking about it this morning, preterists would say, well, we do see a progressive liberation from, for instance, poverty. We see a progressive liberation from racism, from disease, from war, from injustice. Wherever the gospel goes out and takes roots, societies are transformed for the better. We do see some progress in human history. Those are some of the strengths. Some of the drawbacks of this view, one major one is that, John clearly mentions at the beginning of his letter that this is also a prophecy. Some things in the book, in that sense, are to me, they're clearly future-oriented, right? I mean, we have the judgment scene of the world at the end of the book. How am I supposed to read that? Is that just all in the past? The return of Christ is in this book. So how am I supposed to see that? Is that figuratively as well, or symbolically? So there's some challenges with this view. One other point is that, sadly, this view, it developed a very anti-Jewish sentiment. It was very much directed against Jewish people. And if you've ever heard of replacement theology, the idea that the church replaced Israel is very dominant in this view, and it has led to unnecessary hostility towards Jewish people. Not just today, I'm not just talking about today, but I'm looking at the wider history. If you look at how Jews were treated in Europe, it's pretty bad. And this view did have something to do with that. So that's number one, all right? That's preterist. Number two is the juicy one. That's the futurist view, okay? That's also known as dispensationalism. Dispensationalism, it took me a while to understand that term, but basically what that means is that the idea is that God has divided human history up in different epochs or eras. And every era has its own grace dispensation. Does that make sense? So you have the pre-fall creation grace, the sinless world. Then you have the post-fall world. Then you have the Abrahamic covenant age. You have the Mosaic age and the giving of the law. Then you have the age of grace that we're in currently. And so that's what dispensationalism says. We're probably all familiar with this view. This view says that, when at least from chapter 4 to chapter 22, all of that is about end time events. So chapter 1 to 3 is the letters to the churches and the introduction of the letter. Chapter 4 is when the visions start. That's where we start entering the throne room. The futurists argue that all of these events described in chapter 4 to 22, that awaits the end times. This is a very, very popular view in the last 50 to 100 years. You'll find it everywhere. Evangelical, charismatic churches, right, Christy? You find this everywhere. Very popular view. A lot of people find that it resonates with them and that there's truth in it. The main approach of this view is that you read the book of Revelation, you need to read it at face value. Why are we making everything symbolic? If God wanted us to read it symbolically, He would make it clear. Our main approach to this book is that we read it literally and that we read it chronologically. That's important. For instance, in Revelation 6, where a third of the world is burned up because of one of the bowls of wrath. That's supposed to be read literally. That's a cataclysmic, world-ending event. There's actual fire coming down from heaven. The sun is going to be darkened. Something's going to happen. Whether it's nuclear disaster, whether we're going to destroy ourselves, or it's an anti-Christ figure going to destroy a people group, something's going to happen. In this view, there is a clear distinction between prophecies related to Israel and the church. So this view really stimulates sort of like an unconditional support for the Jewish people and sometimes also the state of Israel. That's where that comes from. This view is premillennial and pre-tribulational, which means that they believe that Christ will return twice. That's the view I told you before from the late great planet Earth. Christ will return first before the tribulation happens to rapture his church, and then he will return after the great tribulation period to establish a 1,000-year literal reign on earth where he will rule and reign. After that, there's a short period of time. There's going to be another short war, and then the end will come. That's the futurist view. All right, some strengths to this view, some pros. I like this view in a sense that, chapter 1, verse 19 says that some events in this book are past, some things are past, some things are happening now, and some things are about to happen. Right? So this view honors the future element to the book. I also like that this view kind of distinguishes between, what's happening in heaven influences what's happening here on earth. The things that God declares in heaven, the things that are true in heaven, they end up having consequences here on earth. In fact, everything that happens in heaven is the source of what happens here on earth. Everything that we see is a